ex-bureaucrat. I request our moderator and esteemed panelists to kindly come up and take the seats on the dais, please. Thank you. I would request our moderator to kindly start the session on gained in translations. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm quite humbled to be here today. And it's a way of saying thank you to the organizers. Hello? Again, very humbled to be here today. It's a way to say thank you to the organizers. I think the best thing I could say is that you've managed in 3 days to turn all these people from around the world into Assamese for 3 days today. We now have a common language, and for that I pay tribute to the translators who have done amazing work to bring the books, the stories, into a language that we can all share, and we can begin to have an understanding of each other. I would like to dispense with the introduction of the panelists, because you can read it in the book, in this book here. But I'm grateful to have both of you with us today. What I'd like to do is to begin with some notions and some ideas about translation that hopefully can frame the conversation we would have today. To me, foremost in translation is an act of peace. It's an act of crossing frontiers, of breaking borders, of erasing borders. With borders, we do not have understanding of the other, of other people, of other cultures, other language, other attitudes. I ask you to think, in my case, of the Vietnam War. Just imagine for once that if all the American soldiers, before they went to Vietnam to go to war, had read books by Vietnamese authors, could they then kill? You cannot kill. If you read and understand the people and you have empathy for them, you cannot create wars. So to be able to read in another language is an act of peace. It is also to us, may not be to the other panelists here, Roland, and to me it's an act of indulgence. Kazuo Ishiguro has once told me, you know, he feels indulgent taking 2 weeks to think of one word. Well, I take a little bit longer to think of one word and then to think of an equivalent word in another language. I don't know whether you've taken that much time. But it is an indulgence. I took 3 years to translate a volume of poetry, and it was daily when I was thinking about it, whether I was taking a shower, making breakfast, or driving. Those words were in my mind, and it was an act of indulgence because I could block out the rest of the world. But it is also an act of love, that one loves one's own language, whichever that happens to be, or another language. And in that way, in love, in as much as being part of another culture, another language, you're both the insider and the outsider. And in Vietnamese, we have a notion that when you love somebody, you become that other person and that other person becomes you. And so when we address our love, our lover, our wives, our husband, our spouse, we say self. We don't say you, we don't say me or I, we say self. So a sentence may come out like this: myself. Would self like some coffee? Self would make self some coffee. We become one. The act of translation allows us to become one in that act of love. and it becomes a question of loyalty. Am I loyalty to myself or to the other person? Am I loyal to this language or to the other? So let me begin asking, perhaps Roland, to back to the notion of an act of peace. Do you feel that way?
Namaste. First of all, I want to thank you for the organizers that invited me at this fantastic festival. It is a very, very good organized festival. I attended to many festivals, and I think this is one of the best organized festivals. Now, really. I'm not saying this because I want to cheat you, to say something positive to you, to have the clap hand that you clap to me, but I really think it is a really, really good organized festival. And this festival also shows all that what you were saying about translation. So we are here from different cultures, and we have opportunity to share our thoughts, to meet each other, to spread out our horizons, and that's what translation does, if it's a good translation, of course. I have never thinking about translation as an act of peace, but since I'm from mixed origin, and my mother is mixed also. She is Croatian, Serb, and Hungarian, but she speaks Serbian and of course Hungarian, but more Serbian. And me myself, my father is Hungarian, but my family name is Slovakian, so I'm so to call Central European Turmics. And to translate from Serbian into Hungarian, for me it's important because the history of Serbs and Hungarians is very bloody. There are a lot of traumas, and even if the literature cannot stop the bloodshed, cannot stop the wars, but it's still, there is, in literature, there is an alternative, as you were saying, the possibility to meet the other, who is different than I in something, but there are a lot of similarities. For example, when we are thirsty, we will drink water.
You talked about the regional conflicts in ethnicity and religion. This region is the same. You have lots of ethnic groups, and you have different religions, you have different borders and areas, and culturally. Is that the same when you translate? Do you think of yourself as doing the work of peace?
Namaste to all, and I welcome our guests, writers from other countries. I am very happy that this is third time I am attending this literary festival, and this year we are getting maximum number of the writers from all over the world, especially from Southeast Asian countries, who are very much similar to us, culture-wise, way of living-wise, and then I think we look similar, and our approach to the life is also similar. India is a very big country, having different racial, ethnic groups, and different languages. It is not like the countries of other parts of the world. So it is a divergent ethnic groups having different languages, different literature, different kind of culture. So when we talk about the Indian literature, we have to depend upon, say, an Assamese people. You won't be able to understand the other languages except perhaps Bangla and Hindi. So they have to depend upon on the translation, depend to know India, depend to read Indian literature. So in this context, translation has become a very important aspect to know even our own country, even our own literature. So I am very happy that I will be able to speak something about myself, something about others' translation, and my experience I will be to share my experience.
I want to ask both of you, when you choose a work to translate, what is the main issue that you choose? Do you choose something that is so different? Because we all reach for the universal. We all talk about love, about war, about peace. We talk about human emotions that are universal, the same for everyone. But when you choose a work to translate, do you say, I want to choose this because it is different?
First of all, when I choose a work for translation, I choose it because I think that work is good. And I think that the Hungarian readers should know that work. What's good, for example, it's, as you said, different form of novel, like there are in Hungary. So maybe it can inspire some writer or some reader in Hungary in that form of novel. Or if it's an issue about the poetry, that it's, yes, from some aspect it's very different, but from the other aspect, I think that that poem can be will find very good readers in Hungarian language. But of course, my role in this is also, or not the role of translator is also very important in this process, because he's creating actually almost a new poem in the other language. So actually there are some things which cannot be translated. And therefore we do not translate just words, we translate cultures also.
I can say that I am a translator because my books are being translated by others. Till now there are about 25 translators are there who have translated my books to different languages, around 9-10 languages. And with a few translations I am very happy. But most of the translations, I am not happy. I have translated 2-3 books. The driving force behind why I took the translation of those books. Some books are thrust upon me. I could not refuse the request. Say I have translated the General J.J. Singh's autobiography. He was governor of Arunachal Pradesh, and he said that Mr. Tongchi, why you don't translate it into Assamese? I had to say yes, and I spent 2.5 years translating that book. And I feel that instead of translating that book, spending 2.5 years, I could have written 2-3 novels, which would have been translated by other people, other translators to other languages. I have taken 1 or 2 books for translation. I will talk about Bodhicharya Bhattara of Acharya Shantideva. For that translation, I took about 5-6 years. I have completed now. And that translation I have not done from one source only or from one language only. It is in Sanskrit, it is in Tibetan, it is in English, it is in Hindi. So I took help of 8 books to translate that book of poetry, you can say book of why I fell in love with Dharmacharya Bhattara. I had been to Sikkim and I found in one bookshop, this book, The Way of the Bodhisattva. Before that, Gita used to be my favorite book. I used to read Gita. And after reading this book, I fell in love with this book. I stopped reading Gita, I started reading this book. Because this is one of the greatest books ever produced in India, but Indian people does not know. Even Shantidev's, Acharya Shantidev's name is not known to the people of Assam. I asked many scholars, many people, whether they have ever heard Acharya Shantidev. They said that no, we have not heard. Santipada is there, he wrote this. অসমীয়া ল'ৰাবিলাক কৈ দিয়াচোন এইটো অসমৰ প্ৰথম এইটো কিবা Louis Pada, Santi Pada were the first persons who, it is claimed that they have started, Assamese literature started with them. No, not Bhattadev. Sorry. না এইটো বৌদ্ধ ধৰ্মৰ সৰু সৰু কবিতাবিলাক আছে সৰ্যাপদ those were written by the Buddhist scholars and that is regarded as the first Assamese literature. But Santideva's name was not known to anybody else. I took help of these books, The Nectar of Manjusri's Speech, Santideva's Bodhicharya by English translation by Paramananda Sharma, The Way of Bodhisattva, Wilson Fletcher, Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, Stephen Butler, Scientific Justice translation in Hindi, Face of Lightning in the Dark of Night by Dalai Lama, Healing of Anger by Dalai Lama, and then translation into Hindi by Karma Molla. I feel this book should be read because this has given me immense help in my life. I was very angry man earlier. Now I have become very calm man due to this. I have become happy because of this book. I started laughing peace because of this book. And I feel that this book should be read by people. They will be benefited. And I took 5 years. I am rendering it into poetic form because it is in the poetic form. Let me take the example of one stanza. In Sanskrit it is Akasasya Sityavata Yavada Jagata Sthiti Tavanam Sthiti Priyat Jagat Dukhani Itanakta. In Tibetan it is Sangye Nepane. I have forgotten. In English it is so long as the space remains and as long as the sentence remains. May I abide by to dispel the miseries of your I am getting I have done it this way. যেতিয়ালৈকে থাকিব আকাশৰ স্থিতি থাকিব যেতিয়ালৈকে পৃথিৱীত চৰাচৰ দুখৰ পানী মস্কলি সকলোৰে যাম সেৱা মই অবিৰতভাৱে So long as the space remains, we the writers, what is our work? Our work is to give some happiness to the others. Our work is to do away with the sufferings of the others. That is what exactly Acharya Santideva has said. I will come to that later.
It is about giving happiness to another. To translate is to provide the reader with something that otherwise they couldn't have been exposed to or to read. But I think of spending 5 years on a book translated. I think of it's an indulgence. It gives me happiness to work on something like that for such a time. But I'm sure it also gives us a lot of frustrations. Do you want to speak about the frustrations of dealing with another language, dealing with your own language, and dealing with the proper transformation from one language to the other?
Of course, I think every translator, or at least most of the translators, are frustrated machines of literature in some way. And of course, machines of happiness in literature. Because one work cannot be 100% translated into another work. So every translator starts from this. When you create art piece, then you think, now I will create something perfect. Of course, maybe you will feel that when it's over, but after you will feel this, after a few, that, oh, it's not so perfect, I should correct, I should make another novel, I should write another poem, etc., etc. But when you translate, all the time, you are forced to see that something is not translatable at all. So that you have to use footnotes, etc., etc., from time to time. So actually, the act of translation is a bit different just from the act of pure creation. It is a creation, but it's a secondary creation, actually. So this gives me a frustration, of course. And the second is what Mr. Told about when he was translating one novel, as far as I remember, that for 3 years, he felt that he would lose his time, that he could write his own novel. That also, I had these things with me. But also I know if the translation will be good, if my editors will be good, then the Hungarian reader will feel good if he reads that book. So in that, from that perspective, yes, the translation is, it makes you happy, but frustrated and happy at once.
Just as a break, let me get a sense of the people in the audience. Has anybody translated books before in the audience? There's one. Have anybody translated your own work from one language to another? Because I think there's a difference between translating your own work and translating somebody else's work. It's very difficult. And I want to relate to you something that happened to me when I translated this short story from an author who's now, a Vietnamese author who's now living in Germany. I spent a lot of time with the short story, which I actually loved. It's one of the best stories I've translated. I received a letter from the author that was longer than the short story itself, telling me where I was wrong. And it was very difficult at some moment to sit with the author and say, you know, in English that wouldn't work. If you want me to stay so true to your original writing, but to turn that into English would not work at all. And this is why I had to make this decision. But that's an incredibly difficult moment for me to deal with an author who didn't quite understand English, but did not like the work at all. We ended up coming to terms with each other and we published the story. Have you had that kind of experience?
Yes, of course. When you're translating the living author, you have that kind of experience. When you're translating the dead author, which is the best, for the translator, the best author is the dead author. But not always, because as a translator you have questions. When I was translating the novel of Mirko Kovac, he's a Serbo-Croatian novelist. He died, but I translated his works when he was still alive. And for me it was a big thing that I could ask him so many things. So we share a lot of letters about some problems in his novel. So for me it was a really, really good thing. First of all, I could translate a really good novel. It was a really good one. Actually, it was his last one. After this, 2 years after this, he died. And I have a lot of letters from him. So it was an exchange of thoughts. I learned many, many things from that. So for me, it was very important. But sometimes it depends on the author. There was one author, he was very egoistic. And when I asked something, he answered to me, "Oh, you stupid, you don't know that." I said, "I don't know, can you please explain it?" No, you cannot translate my poem if you don't know that. So I had arguments and etc., etc. It's not always that easy, but it can happen that it could be very, very inspiring to speak with the author.
You mentioned differences in cultural attitudes. When we translate, we don't translate purely words, but we translate attitudes or customs or way of thinking. There's also something in translation which I'd like Mr. Ponce to address, which is about the experience and perhaps the age or the way you use language as a translator. At one point or another, I mean, language evolves, readers evolve, writers evolve, they use language differently. How do we keep up with that, or is that something you deal with at all? Whether you say, well, the way I would have said this in my language or in this language, in my time, in my experience, this is a better way to say it, so I'm going to do it. Or do you say, well, no, I'm going to stick very closely to the original writing and have to understand this new way of expressing oneself?
Yes, every language has got its own uniqueness. Actually, language its origin is always based upon the culture of that language speaking group. Say Assamese language, when you are translating it into English, you find that English language is inadequate. Recently, I translated all the words of Dr. Bhupen Hazarika about his writings about Arunachal Pradesh. I had to translate it for the people of Arunachal Pradesh who does not understand Assamese nowadays. So I had to translate it into English so that they can understand what Bhupen Hazarika wrote about Assam, about Arunachal Pradesh. And I found that English language is not adequate to express those Assamese thoughts, those words. You won't find similar words in English. And when I translate from English to Assamese, again I find that Assamese language is not adequate for English. Because many things are there which cannot be expressed in Assamese. That difference is always, inadequacy is always there. And I don't translate my own words. Because I could have translated it into English, into Hindi, which languages I know very well. But why I don't do? I'm very not satisfied always with my own words. When I complete a word, get it published, then next time I think that I could have written in better way. And when I start translating it, I go away from this thing. I started my approach, I started writing a very different story. So I allow others to translate it because they will not do it. But in one or two cases, I found that the translators, they have inserted their own ideas, their own these things, and knowing the culture on what, in which background your novel is written or your short story is written, that is very important. I take the example of my novel Sona. Many of you might have read it, and this is in the, you are of course also in the post-graduation. One gentleman, he translated into Hindi, And while he translated into Hindi, he kept in mind, because since it was written in Assamese, he thought that I am Assamese and I have written that book on the background of Assam. So that background was on the high Himalayas, the yak herders, there is no question of having the thatch houses. There is always, the houses will be always either of stone or of the log cabins. He made it thatch cabin. He brought all the vegetations of Assam, which cannot be grown in high hilly areas, Tamil. And he inserted Assamese culture. There is no question of people of high, that Himalayan region, they have never seen the Tamil coconut trees. They have never seen it, not to speak of eating it. But in Assam, the custom is that if some guest comes into a house, he will be offered with the betel nut, first thing, Tamil part. And he made it, inserted in the translation, in my translation, which was not in the list. So this thing happens. That's why a translator should know the culture of that of the what we call upon which the fiction is written.
Thank you. I actually appreciate the fact that you mentioned that a certain language is inadequate in some ways. And I fear saying something like that, although I have been in that position where I say, well, this is Vietnamese is inadequate and I cannot translate this. It takes a certain sense of confidence in both languages to say this language is not adequate, or this moment, these words are not adequate. And I remember with my best friend who worked on the same book with me for 3.5 years, we got to a moment where we would call each other at 3 o'clock in the mornings, I found the word. And then we would argue. And then we come to a point where we say, no, let's not do this book. You don't understand, you can't do this book. And no, I don't want to work with you anymore. There's no way we can translate it. If that word is completely inadequate, it's not right. It's just not right. This is not what the author means. And we go back and forth until 3 years later we met the authors and all that. Do you find that sort of inadequate way to look at a language?
Of course, yes. Mr. Yeshe Dorje Tongchi told us some of these things just before, and about translating something Assamese into English. But you have here a specific situation in India because a lot of authors write already in English, so they are already in some kind of process of translation. So it's at once they have the process of translation and creation in themselves. I found that very, very fantastic, and even that there are still a lot of Indian cultures, and everything is so you cannot say Indian authors write in English like that way, because there are a lot of cultures in a lot of type of English languages here in India. As far as I concern in my culture, for example, when I was translating that problem, which is the problem of dialects. For example, there are in the Yugoslav war, when Yugoslavia was broke up, the Croats and Serbs, they were trying to speak totally differently, even if they understand each other. Actually, there is a theory that that's a one language, and Serbian and Croatian and Bosnian, Montenegrin, those are just dialects. The problem is how would we name that language? Of course, if we say Croatian, Serbs will take out their Kalashnikovs and start to shoot. If they would say, let's call it Serbian, the Croats will take out their Kalashnikovs and start to shoot, etc. And the Bosnians and the Montenegrins. That's the problem. Now, when one novel I was translating was dealing with that problem, how could I translate this into Hungarian? Simply, the Hungarian reader will not understand. When the Serbian or the Croatian reader reads one sentence, which has the structure of Croatian grammar, but is still understandable for the Serbian reader, he will know that this character is speaking Croatian. So it depends on the context. He's my enemy because he's a Croat. Or another way, he's my enemy if he speaks Serbian. Because he speaks Serbian, he's my enemy. Same thing is the Croatian character in that novel. So, but to translate this into Hungarian, I cannot do it without footnotes. But if you have a novel with footnotes, and there is always question, should I put the footnote at the end of the page or at the end of the novel? So that's what I think it's translation. It's not just a translation of words, it's a translation of cultures as well.
I can think of many examples of this sort of difficulties when you deal with language, and I translate in 4 or 5 languages, and again, the notion of something being inadequate, and then working with others to translate this stuff. Let me hopefully take some time to give some examples of what the Vietnamese do, for example. The Vietnamese sometimes don't like to speak of anything in the abstract. So when you say, she loves him, you cannot use this love, this abstract notion of an emotion. You say, she sleeps and eats with him. And that's very different in English. It's very concrete. The Vietnamese tend to make things concrete because they can't deal with certain abstract notions of things. Or they can't talk about emotions of themselves because it's just not in us to talk about ourselves. So we say, the trees and the clouds were very sad today. Well, that means nothing to an American or an English reader. Trees and clouds don't have emotions. And so we say, well, the clouds are very gray. That doesn't mean anything either. It's a translation of that. And in this book, for example, the poet himself addresses this. He says, roundabout, I say I love the sea, love the sky, to say I love you. And so he's directly addressing love, but he's taking an exception. And so then, even then, the translation is difficult. Now there are cultural differences which I'd like to ask if you see similarities. The Vietnamese don't feel with the heart or with the head. We feel with the stomach. And we say, my intestines are rotten, to say, I am sad. Well, you can't translate a line of poetry where you say, well, she said something that made my intestines rot. Do you have that problem?
Yes, such problems are there in it. While translating, you will find so many such problems. You cannot adequately express. Say in our language, I speak a language which is spoken only by around 4,000 people. That's why I have to write in Assamese. And while writing in Assamese, again I have to think in my own mother tongue. Since I am writing about the tribal life, there are so many things which are there in the tribal life which cannot be expressed in the Assamese. Neither Assamese words say many things which cannot be expressed in English or in any other language. Say Joron. Take the example of the Joron. In Assamese, Joron means it is a custom during the marriage ceremony, just before marriage ceremony. One day before marriage ceremony. So if I have to write it in English, I have to explain it in a great way, in this thing. Say, in my language, we call it Nyikpa, which I cannot express neither in English nor in Assamese. The way when I call a Nyikpa, what feeling I get at that time. In Assamese, monopoly say, that feeling does not come. Or in English, if you say what you call in English also, I have just forgotten the word. English of Kikobo, Monot will say. Huh? Nine. Remember.
Comes to my mind.
Huh?
Comes to my mind.
No. There's another word I have forgotten. That does not exactly express what when I say Nikpa. So these are the uniqueness of all the languages and but feeling the that word provides. Like you have said, stomach, intestine. If it is said in Assamese, we will be laughing. What are you saying like that? No. So I think it is languages are always inadequate for other language speaking.
Well, do you have problems with stomachs?
It's a good question because maybe you are a shaman because when I was born, I was born with that. Actually. But here it is now, absolutely no. So when I was first time in India, I had, but now nothing. So, by the way, just to add something to what Mr. Yeshe Doji said, and you on the question. For example, in Hungarian, we have two words for love. One is when you love your friend, you say szeretet. But when you love a girl or boy, then you say szerelem. But in Serbian, Croatian, in English, etc., a lot of languages in German, there is only one word for it. So even in this case, sometimes the translator must be careful how he will create the context of the word. So, and not to speak about some rude words. There's a lot of funny things. Then I try to translate some rude words into Hungarian. Can I say one example? For example, in Serbian, Croatian, Bosnian, the people, when they are tired of something and they don't want to deal with it, they say, can I say the root word? My dick is in pain. My dick is in pain. It's strange. My dick is in pain. When I translate this literally into Hungarian, the Hungarian reader will think, what his dick is sick or what? Why is his dick in pain? So when I use this root word, dick is in pain, or I have to find another root expression in Hungarian, or I have to put where the word dick, I have to put footnote, dick note.
Well, there are many ways of dealing with the connotations of something, a word in English and a word in Vietnamese. Obviously, sometimes, well, we don't even have this word in Vietnamese, right? Because we don't recognize certain issues, certain problems. Say there are many words in the English language, gay, queer, all that. The Vietnamese haven't begun to have these words yet. And they have this very formal word. And because the language and the culture demands that you be polite when you write, you can't use these words. It's only, over time that these words begin to pop up and begin to be accepted and begin to... But even words like soul or heart, in Spanish you hear mi corazón all the time. That becomes very corny in English, my heart. And then you use my soul or whatever. It's that sort of thing. But I want to put it in a context, particularly with you, in an area of conflict like yours, where words begin to have political meanings. How do you deal with that? And certainly in Vietnam, I'll take the case of language that's evolved. There are terms that the Vietnamese who lived in the South considered to be terms only used by the communists, and or a way that a word is used, it's only by the communists, and if you're not communist, you cannot use that word. Well, language shouldn't be with these political barriers, and at the same time that happens. Or the most well-known novel at the moment, which won the Pulitzer Prize, Sympathizer. The author, the book is being translated into Vietnamese now. The author is using a word, he decided on the word for mother, ma, which is the Vietnamese, or the southern Vietnamese word for mother. Well, because he grew up in the South, and he'd always referred to his mother as ma, that already puts people, or puts the reader in the minds of this is a southern family. Well, it's not, because his family emigrated from the north to the south at the time of separation of Vietnam into two countries, one communist and one non-communist. The moment you use the word ma, you situate yourself in the non-communist world, and then you change it and you put it in me, which is another word, then you put them in the north. And that's the difficulty with political words. How often do you run into this in your situation?
Of course, it depends on the artwork which I'm translating. But when I'm translating the contemporary literature, which deals with these political issues, about this question of about the question of controlling the language, the influence of the power, ideology in the language. How is it translatable? Because when we have so strong control in the language from the political side, that means that the author is creating a double language, metaphoric language, to trick that language, which is control. Maybe he will make an irony. Maybe he will make a parody of it. So, and for the Hungarian reader who doesn't have, he has another kind of control in his own language. To recognize these points of control, he will need or footnotes, but I don't like footnotes. I usually then put maybe one or two words plus into the main text, so the reader will not stop reading the novel. So, if it's possible, then I always put one or two words more, not to deconstruct the structure of the sentence, but to keep it in the form of for the reader, to be good for the reader. It's like when Gustav Mahler, the great composer, he was also a conductor. When he was reinterpreting the symphonies of Ludwig van Beethoven, from time to time he changed some things. But he didn't change because he was disrespectful with Beethoven. But because he was thinking it was 100 years, and the listener, the contemporary listener, hear different sounds, have different expectations. So that's my work as a translator as well. If it's possible, it's not good if it will ruin the sentence, because it will destroy something. So it's a big task.
I think it's a big task. Generally, in some sense, a cultural attitude where you understand how it's being received in another language by another culture. We always laugh. In Indonesia, for example, when you see each other, when you meet each other in the street, you say, "Mau kemana?" Where are you going? And I remember all of the Westerners, like, none of your business where I'm going, don't ask me that. Because that's rude in the Western sense where you're asking people something like that. But in Indonesia, it's just a common thing, greetings. It's at a level of communication. Where are you going? Have you eaten yet? Mau kemana? Do you have that problem? Because what I'm trying to get at is that at some point, the translator becomes the gatekeeper. You don't translate just the word. You translate political attitude, you translate cultural attitudes, and you make one wrong mistake, or you make one mistake, you choose the wrong word. then you are on this side of the political line or on that side of the cultural boundaries. How do we deal with that?
Yes, choosing the right word for right expression is very, very important. And different ethnic groups have got their own way of behavior, way of greeting each other, and it is very difficult to translate it into other language. I will take the example of a tribe of Arunachal Pradesh, Apatani. I wondered one day, one person came from this side, another person came from that side, they met, one said ah, another said ah, and they departed. What they had exchanged, we could not understand. One said ah, another said ah, okay. So now, how you will translate it? You cannot say hello. This is not so. Hello will give another meaning, another intonation. So if you have to translate it into English, you cannot say hello. In the Assamese, Ale aseneki, kenekwa, how are you? That also, they will not exact be what you call Apatanic culture. Such difficulties are there in the translation. And even in writing also it is very difficult.
A few years ago, I brought back to Vietnam an author, very well known, very celebrated in the US, Raymond Carver, one of the best short story writers in English language. And everybody that I introduced the book to said, this is amazing, we haven't read this before. Should we translate it? Why don't you translate it? And I say, it's impossible for me to translate it. First of all, because I cannot find the equivalent in Vietnamese to translate the language used by a Mexican woman who works in a cheap hotel in the south of America or south of the US, dealing with a white man in that region. It's all of the context of that is there. And unless you've lived in these regions and you understand the kind of, not broken English, but this kind of patois that the Mexican or Central Americans would use to speak English, how do you render that? Do you find a region in Vietnam that has sort of that kind of language and put it in there? How authentic is it at the end that you begin to explain this? The same thing with Murakami. When I introduced it to people, Norwegian would. Everybody loved the book in English, those who read English. And since then, 2 people have translated it, and I can't bear to read it in Vietnamese. So I would just go frustrated, and so this is so badly translated, not only because you don't understand the language, but you don't understand the context of things. And again, we rely on footnotes. We rely on certain language to make it authentic. We'll say you translate somebody speaking from the turn of phrases from the southern part of the US versus the northern part of the US. It's completely different. So what other ways do you suggest we deal with this?
I can say one very funny example. One of my friends, he's a really good poet, Otto Fejnashi is his name. He was starting to translate one poem from one Croatian poet, Branko Malaš. He writes the poetry in the style of Ludism, and that style is absolutely not present in the Hungarian literature. So he was the style is to use non-logical but not nonsense. It's not catachresis. That's the Latin name for it. To use the catachresis as a tool of poetics in the poetry, short. And he was starting to translate the poem of Branko Malaš, but ended up writing his own. Because he didn't use footnotes. He was trying to explain in the poem one word here, one word there, and in the end, he wrote from a one-page poem. He wrote 8-page long his own poem.
It's difficult. I once met a Chinese author and read her book, which is about sex, drugs, and roll in China. I read the book in English. It had been translated in English. I thought, what a lovely translation. It conveyed a lot to me. I related to it. Then I met her and we said, well, let's do a documentary about her and her life as a writer in China and changing. And I got there and I had the script and we had the producers and the directors and the camera crew. And then I started reading the same book, translated into French. And it was a complete different book. It was much more nuanced and moody. And I realized that the languages do that to you. I mean, if you read it in another language. And I stopped the whole production. And I said, look, we're here for 2 weeks. We have to make this movie. I'm like, no, I want to read this thing. Because I want to understand this woman a bit better. But that was a luxury that I had, that I could use 2 languages to understand this woman. And when you're translating, there's always the fear that you don't have enough understanding. And sometimes the author is dead or living somewhere else and you can't meet that. And then you begin to play the role of the insider-outsider. That you stand with the reader and you say, I'm an outsider like you, looking into this world of this author, of this language. But I'm also the insider. Let me open the door for you to come into this world. Do you have that fear? Do you have the apprehension of being the gatekeeper and at the door and having to be that one bridge where people walk over you to get to know this place?
Yes, it happens with the translators. I haven't experienced myself. I did an experiment with Bodhicharya. I translated one chapter twice. Chapter 5, it is on anger. And after completion of, say, I have completed translating the chapter number 5. While translating, I am not taking from one source or from word to word. I have to understand exactly what meaning is there, because there are a lot of Buddhist terminologies, then a lot of what you call religious thoughts and all those things. So I translated the chapter 5. Then next year again I translated that same chapter 5. And later on when I compared it, it was quite different, 2 different translations. There is no similarity with the earlier one to next one. Ultimately, what I did, I had to choose some from stanzas from this translation, some from this translation, and made another third edition. That happened with me. So from same book, it can be, you will find a different, what do you call it? Sometimes it becomes quite different thing, translation. That's why it is called a recreation or something like that.
Thank you very much, both of you, Ms. Tonsi and Roland, for exploring some of the difficulties. But again, my tribute to the translators who are courageous to be that bridge, to open the doors one way or another. I'd like to take the remaining minutes to see if you have questions for our panelists here about language, about translations.
Any questions?
have a question for Mr. Yeshadorji Thomji. Although this question is not really related to the theme of the discussion today, but it is actually related to one of your most recent novels that I read. It is Moyako Janamnam. I found this novel so fascinating that I was really waiting for this literary festival in 2019 in the hope that I'll get to meet you, because I have so many questions in my mind. So I'll maybe ask about a couple of them. The first question I have is, after reading only at the end of the novel, I realized that many of the characters in the novel, these are actually based on many well-known historical figures. And of course, the events that are mentioned in the novel, they are that I did realize while reading the novel that they are based on actual historical events. The places they are real places. But I have one question which I was not sure about. The main character, the fallen Rinpoche. His character, is it based on a real person? Even a yes or no will suffice. I need to know that. Thank you, sir.
I am happy that you have read that novel. It is in two parts. One is before taking birth, and another is after birth. You see, the rebirth is a very controversial subject. And amongst the Buddhists, the Rinpoches are said to be taking rebirth again and again to serve the people. And the character is not a real one, but subject matter is very controversial one. Say, take the example of His Holiness Dalai Lama. He had taken, this is his 14th birth. And you exactly don't know exactly this whether Dalai Lama is taking rebirth again and again, or you are choosing the wrong person in the name of rebirth. So characters, yes, many of characters are of historical figures, real characters. I have got all those things in this, but the main character is, yes, there are so many such people who are not recognized as a Rinpoche, but wrongly chosen different person as a Rinpoche. And what kind of life they live after when they are rejected as a Rinpoche, whereas they should have been real Rinpoche. That's what I have depicted in my that novel.
Thank you, sir. And any other question?
Hello, sir. More question to Thomsi sir. Like, is there more comment to this? Sir, ধৰক মানে বহুত এনে অসমীয়াটো ধৰক এনে বহুত শব্দ আছে যি মানে বিভিন্ন পৰিস্থিতিত বিভিন্ন ধৰণৰ অৰ্থ প্ৰকাশ কৰে সময়ত কেতেকী বুলি যদি কওঁ আমিহে বুজিম যে কেতেকী এজনী চৰাই কিন্তু বেলেগ মানে বেলেগ ভাষাৰ লোকসকলে হয়তো নুবুজিবও পাৰে যে কেতেকী আচলতে কি কেতেকী ফুলো আছে চৰাইও আছে এই ক্ষেত্ৰত অনুবাদক হিচাপে আপুনি মানে বেলেগ ভাষাৰ এনেকুৱা ধৰণৰ শব্দবিলাক অনুবাদ কৰোঁতে জটিলতা অনুভৱ কৰে নেকি বাৰু
জটিলতা নিশ্চয় আছে জটিলতা বহুত আছে সেইটো কাৰণেইতো কৈছোঁ একজেক্টলি এটা ভাষাৰ এটা কবিতা বা উপন্যাস অন্য এটা ভাষাত অনুবাদ কৰিব নোৱাৰে বিশেষকৈ কবিতা অনুবাদ কৰাটো খুব টান আমাৰ ইয়াত আমাৰ সুৰজিত বৰুৱাৰ ছাৰ আছে তেখেতে জানিব তেখেতে এক্সপাৰ্ট মানে কবিতা অনুবাদ কৰা মই দুই এটা অনুবাদ কৰিছোঁ কবিতা আৰু এইটো এতিয়া যিটো কৰি আছোঁ এইটো বনিচাৰ্য বতৰা কিতাপখন মই নিজে প্ৰকাশ কৰিম কাকো নিদিম মই নিজৰ টকাৰে প্ৰকাশ কৰিম আৰু পিক দিম মানুহে পঢ়ক সেইটো কিতাপ পঢ়ি যদি কাৰোবাৰ উপকাৰ যদি আহে মই ভাবিম মোৰ পুণ্য অৰ্জন কৰিব এইটো কবিতা অনুবাদ কৰা বহুত দিগদাৰ হয় বিশেষকৈ আৰু এটা সেইটোৱেইটো দিগদাৰ মানে এইটো সম্পূৰ্ণৰূপে এটা ভাষাৰ কিতাপ অন্য এটা ভাষালৈ অনুবাদ কৰিব নোৱাৰে তাত মানে সৌন্দৰ্যটো হেৰাই যায় আসল ইসেন্সটো হেৰাই যায়
Thank you. Yeah, sure.
I just want to make an observation. It's not that I want to question something, you know. And I'm a translator of poetry from Assamese to English. And in my experience, 20 years of experience as a translator, now I found that, yes, as Mr. Thomsey has said, the translation of poetry is really very difficult. You know? Because in prose, you just translate directly. There is no question of reading, rhyme, resonance, or these kind of things. But to translate Assamese poetry, coming directly to the point, into English, these two languages are very remotely connected. About 2,500 years back, Indo-European group of languages. But otherwise, they have become very different. So, absolutely difficult, you know, and basically because of rhythm and resonance, which are very different. And also, the point that I want to make is that what we have talked about, I mean, you all have talked about, you know, the cultural differences. So, this translation, I call it cultural transference. Cultural transference. For instance, in one of Nilmani Fukon's poems, I'm quoting in Assamese, Teo Agoli Kolapatot Egosi Kulita Zolai Dile. Now, how do you translate that into English? It's very difficult. And because, okay, you can directly translate in a banana leaf end or something like that, he lit a wick, okay? But that meaning that it could carry for an Indian, the same meaning will not carry for a foreigner, or maybe to some Eastern countries it may mean something, but to a Westerner it doesn't mean anything. It has got no significance of any religious significance or any other thing. So these are some of the this cultural transference is the most difficult thing. And the observation that I want to make is that ultimately, probably 80 to 80%, you are being true when you translate poetry. So, and as somebody has pointed out that giving footnotes, you know, so yes, that becomes very tiring and boring also. Too many footnotes and all that. Yeah. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I have one question. How do you deal with situations where a simile just doesn't exist in another language? We touched that topic. How do you deal with situations where a simile just doesn't exist in another language? You know, we have touched that topic, but I just want to know, how do you deal with it? You just give up with the project, or is there a way that you can deal with it?
Well, you take your time and you think, how would I do this in my language? How would I express this? How would my people, my languages, and at some point, you try not to give up, but you try to come as close as possible to that sense, whether it's close to the language or close to the emotion that's being expressed. But that brings up the last point that I'd like to make here. We all are speaking English here in these last 3 days. We know the world now, English is very prevalent. The frustration that I have now is that when we translate, we don't translate directly from one language to another. We go through a language like English, which already changes things with attitudinal things, with words, with all that. But we're obligated. I mean, in Vietnam, there are a couple of people who translate from Spanish and from Italian. I would love to be able to read Pemuda Torah in Bahasa and translate that into Vietnamese. But if I want to do it now, I still have to go through English. And I was hoping that we would have time to deal with that question, because that has now, to me, become the most important part of translation, where the whole world relies on English. and that you've lost a bit of the original cultural language.
Thank you, sir.
We talk much about untranslated, those words, expressions which cannot be translated into another language. One example, when haiku poetry, Matsuo Basho, was translated first time in Hungarian language 100 years ago by one symbolist poet, Dezső Kosztolány. It was so different than everything written in Hungarian till that time, that he simply could not deal how to translate the silence in haiku poetry. And he, instead of 3 verses, he started to explain. He made 8 verses. So, it's not just a question of translating words, but translating the silence in poetry and art.
What a profound thought about translating silence. I really appreciate being a part of this panel, being with both of you, and thank you very much once again, all of you.
You have come from part of places. Before going from here, I want to just recite my wish through this book. Sorba disa siva sumtu sabesa pati partina. Yena kayana bachati todo upana siddhatu. Noyana yatra tacha santu siddha manarata. Khemena pulamasantara. This means, since you have come from long way, may travelers upon the road find happiness no matter where they go. And may they gain without the need of toil the goals on which they set their hearts. May those who put to sea in boat or ship, or nowadays you can say by flight, attain the ports that they desire, and may they be safely come to shore and seek sweet reunion with your kid and me.
Thank you, sir. Hi.
যিসকল পথিকে কৰিছে আৰম্ভ যাত্ৰা সকলো দিশ যেন তেওঁলোকৰ বাবে হয় মংগলময় যি কামৰ বাবে তেওঁলোকে কৰিছে যাত্ৰা সেই কাম যেন হয় ভালভাৱে সমাধা নাও বা জাহাজেৰে যিসকলে কৰিছে নৌ যাত্ৰা নিৰাপদভাৱে যেন নাও লাগে পাৰক আপেক্ষৰত নিজ সম্বন্ধীয় আৰু বন্ধু বান্ধৱৰ লগত পুনৰ যেন মিলিত হয় আনন্দমনে Thank you.
That's such a sweet way to end this session. Thank you so much. I would like to thank each one of you for sharing your valuable insights. It was indeed quite an enlivening discussion. Thank you so much. And audience, we have lined up another interesting session on Cambodia, past, present and future.